Hello and welcome back. I wanted to continue with part 2 of the series examining Surya Namaskar as a vehicle to understand the different approaches amongst the different lineage branches in Krishnamacharya tradition. So I'll start with the invocation to Patanjali and also ending with this line that honors the lineage of teachers. Om Aindukaratane Ane Mohatane Dini Lampere Pundre Etrane Nandi Mahandane Jnana Kurundane Pundeiva Itadi Putru Enrene Yastyakva Rupamadhyam Prapavadi Jagato Nekada Nugrahaya Prakshina Kleshara Shidavishama Vishadaro Nekavakra Subhogi Sarvajnana Prasutir Bushaka Parikara Pritaye Yasya Nityam Devo hi shasavo vyacita vimalatanur yogado yogayuktaha yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sharirasya cha vaidikena yopakarottam pravaram muninam patanjalim pranjaliranatosmi abahu purushakaram shankachakrasidharinam sahasrashirasham shvetam pranamami patanjalim Shrimate Anantaya Nagarajaya Namo Namaha Asmadacharyebhya Sarvebhyo Namo Namaha. Om. All right, thanks again for joining. I wanted to start by reiterating why I'm undertaking this presentation as such. Well, like I was saying, I assume that people are coming from the more popular schools like Ashtanga Vinyasa and Iyengar Yoga, and coming to this video, what a curiosity of what did Krishnamacharya teach, and what is the deal with Srivatsa Ramaswamy, whom many know little about. So we often learn about something through comparison to what we know, which is part of how I'm undertaking this presentation. And then, of course, some stuff may touch a nerve, like the aspect of, well, how fast should I conduct my practice? Are you trying to tell me I'm practicing wrong? No, people are free to practice in the manner that they so choose. I'm just presenting different examples, providing observation, and also examining what people like Pattabhi Jois himself actually said in some instances, and also what the professor Krishnamacharya has said. And of course, I have my bias. Often debate is natural in any case. It occurs in traditional schools in India and has been the case for millennia. So it's normal that there may be some disagreements. Nevertheless, I think it's compelling to consider what the professor Krishnamacharya himself had to say, what he thought was important in practice. What I would suggest again is just to take the time to hear out what this bloke is trying to say. The bloke in question is me, in trying to convey what I've understood was significant to Krishnamacharya and his teachings. So in any case, I'll go back to that document. So here, when Pattabhi Jois says the rule is to practice Surya Namaskar every practice, he makes it out to be a rule, which I sort of I chuckle to it a bit. The idea of rules. What are rules? In Vedic culture, of course, there's entire shastras devoted to rules of prayer, and orthodox individuals try to adhere to these certain rules of governing their ritual ritual practices and whatnot. And as such, Krishnamacharya himself would speak of vinyasa in the sense of practicing asana with vinyasa is like practicing Vedic chanting correctly as according to the proposed tradition. So here Pattabhi Jois is saying the need for Surya Namaskar. If we look at the slide that I showed later on, should the asana practice be done fast and why not? So I'm sort of jumping ahead, but just focusing on what he's speaking about in terms of the respiration, the breathing, proper respiration. So he says fast movements will distort both the blood circulation and the respiration. This results in crookedness of the body and injury to the different parts of the body. Slow practice of asanas with proper respiration, the two having to go together, will not only remove the defects in the body, but result in chitta ekagrata, the one-pointed mind, which is serving one to then move towards, through the limbs of yoga, towards the practice of seated meditation proper, where this is an asset to have this trained, cultivated, one-pointed mind. However, I must insist that this practice should be done from the direct instruction of a teacher, in any case. So I take this to mean that Krishnamacharya at this point is referring vinyasa more in a broad sense. He's referring slow practice of asanas with proper respiration as vinyasa. That's the integral thing. Indeed, when you see quotes of Pattabhi Jois, he's often alluding to how important the breath itself is. So is vinyasa not simply the correct breathing as such? Like here, he's talking about yoga is internal cleansing, not external exercising. Breathing is very important. Without breathing, the spiritual body and mind are not coming. Breathing, it is the method. That is called vinyasas. So right there, he's equating breath with vinyasas. So not merely doing weight-bearing movements between postures. It's really to do with the breath. He just presented in such a manner that has these fantastic transitional movements, but it all has to do with the breathing. So what else did I take note of that I wanted to address before we move on? So yes, in Ashtanga Vinyasa, going back to the rule of Surya Namaskar, the rule of practicing Surya Namaskar. So in Ashtanga Vinyasa, and the way asanas are described in Krishnamacharya's Yoga Makaranda for that matter, Surya Namaskar to a certain extent also occurs between every asana as vinyasa. So as we can see, here's Surya Namaskar A. Let's take a look. And Surya Namaskar B as occur in Ashtanga Vinyasa. You can see that it's intended that one essentially goes through the motions of performing Surya Namaskar in order to get to the floor to then execute the pose in question. The asana in question here is the extremely important asana, Paschimottanasana. And then a means to come back up to Samastiti in much the same way one comes back up to Samastiti in the Surya Namaskar sequence, as we see. So it's encapsulating the position that we're that we're aiming toward through this motion. It's almost like a ritual motion, encapsulating it within that. And this is again what we see described in Krishnamacharya's Yoga So we can also say it is not necessary to do weight-bearing vinyasa movements every time between every posture, nor weight-bearing vinyasas at all if they are not appropriate to the individual. So, of course, Krishnamacharya and Pattabhi Jois are presenting each asana with the vinyasa as such, encapsulating the posture in question. But if we refer to Nancy Gilgoff, an early Western pupil of Pattabhi Jois, he didn't strictly teach such transitional movements between every single asana, not to her. So, and then of course Ramaswamy is here too. The way Nancy Gilgoff is explaining is much in the same way that we see with Ramaswamy, in that instead of necessarily starting every single asana from Samastiti and ending it in Samastiti, he would neatly group an entire category of related postures together, floor postures, and one would simply lead to this group of postures that are on the floor from Samastiti, and then complete those postures in sequence. And then one can, I say can because it's not obligatory, but one can, and it's implied that one returns to Samastiti, and you can leave that transition back to Samastiti at the end of completing a group of related floor postures as such. So that's much in the same way that Nancy Gilgoff is alluding to here in this article. So the act, and again, like I was saying, what is vinyasa? Is it truly doing weight-bearing transitional movements between postures, or is it really about the breathing? So to me, my understanding of what Krishnamacharya is actually pointing to is the actual key component is the breathing in any case, making it a sacred act. And again, Surya Namaskar is meant to be somewhat of a sacred act. So the fact that we're encapsulating whether a given posture or a group of postures with this sacred act, it makes it particularly special as such. Like the sacred swan that's referred to as Hamsa, that is encapsulated in the mantra that naturally occurs with the breath. You may have heard of this. So with exhale, like a sigh, you know, and the inhale, think like the pranayama technique called seed kari. You're supposed to inhale with the sound like seed. So that's a sound, right? So hamsa. So the mantra that's inherent in the breathing process is referred to in some traditional circles as soham. It's a combination of saha, saha, and aham. I am the it's all-encompassing. So soham is this inherent mantra that's in the within the breathing process, is what I'm saying. So if I just look up this article that I had pulled up a moment ago, So again, yeah, saha and aham, like I said. So saha means he or that, and aham is I am, of course, like ahamkara. I just wanted to clarify that. So this inherently occurs with the breathing process. So remember what we said earlier about samantraka practice. Pattabhi Joy sort of alludes to it here, where he's talking about the Shrutis and the Vedic mantra or Surya Namaskar itself, that being implied with the motion, which is a representation. It's a representation of inherently doing some sort of a prostration. Incidentally, we don't see the full prostration. The closest we get is the danda, the staff pose here, Chaturanga Dandasana. Otherwise, it's meant to symbolize this act of prostration, and the fact that the posture itself is encapsulated with this motion. And vinyasa itself is all about the breathing. Like this sacred mantra, Soham. So you see, this is the logic I was getting at here. In any case. So it's not that every asana requires this encapsulation, enveloping the posture within this symbolic sacred act, but having to highlight the breathing itself with proper respiration, as Krishnamacharya puts it. And again, if we go to what Krishnamacharya said, he's saying, if you practice quickly, it can cause injury. And I mean, this is something logical, right? If you move slowly, especially governed by the correct breathing, that is to be long, there's less chance of causing injury. You're moving slowly, mindfully, and inherently carefully at that. If you move quickly, it's more possible that you do something that injures you. So you have to take care. So this is the only thing. It's kind of logical in and of itself as such, but also what science can say about the nervous system, the parasympathetic nervous system versus this more fight or flight response of the sympathetic nervous system. So if we're moving quickly with the rapid respiration, it's more so stimulating to the sympathetic nervous system that is triggering the fight or flight response, which is very agitating. Whereas if you focus on the long, smooth exhalation, long breathing in general, it's engaging the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest nervous response. So there's also the concentration aspect. So at this point, I'll stop share. So again, going back to this, what Krishnamacharya said, it helps to train the mind towards ekagrata, which is then going to serve one in one's meditation practice proper. So about this more, I'll stop share and get to another screen. So at this point, I'd like to bring up this excellent documentary, The Breath of the Gods. Very excellent documentary that examines Krishnamacharya and his teachings on yoga. And it features some interviews with a few of his children, his living children, not all of them are around anymore, like Deshikachar. Even Sri Bashim, who's in this documentary, has since passed. But a couple of their sisters also talk, Krishnamacharya's daughters. And Alamelu Sheshadri also has some very insightful points to add. That documentary, in fact, I showed an excerpt from it last time, where Pattabhi Jois, more elderly so than the first video that I had showed, is leading the filmmaker of the documentary through Surya Namaskar. So anyways, I'll share screen now. So this is Alamelu talking about yoga as concentration, and then the same thing that Krishnamacharya is talking about, the importance of working with the breathing like this, which cultivates this concentration element that serves one in the pursuit of yoga.
The meaning of yoga is concentration. Samadhi is deep concentration. Concentration to the extent we can go. So when we breathe out and do particular postures, we concentrate on that posture, on the movement.
So here the translation says moment, but they're not understanding her accent. She's saying the movement, because sometimes V becomes W sound depending on the accent. So she's talking about the posture. Yes, of course, the moment is implied, but the moment in time. But she's alluding to the movement. The movement then is slow. You can find her and ask her for clarification on that. I'm pretty certain she's talking about movement. So concentrate on the posture, on the movement through the exhalation, as she just put it. It's not even a translation. She's speaking English. It's just the subtitle itself, I mean.
Particular postures, we concentrate on that posture, on the movement. So it brings our mind back to our body. That helps.
And then this is interesting. The older daughter of Krishnamacharya, she's talking about how he taught them back in the day when they were children. Evidently, he was a very serious individual. Was concerned with a strict outlook. Again, like chanting of the Vedas, you're not supposed to do it casually. It's supposed to be treated with a degree of seriousness. So this is where Krishnamacharya was coming from in that regard. In any case, so now I wanted to show another document I have, just a few pages. Share screen again. Before I talk about Thomas Zorzo, I'll bring up these quotes. So this is again from that same website that I was referring last time for a few quotes of Pattabhi Jois, an interview from 1991, I believe. So I wanted to bring these up in terms of example of where he's alluding to the fact that one has to adjust the practice in order to practice in a reasonable amount of time. So here's some questions. In the class with beginners, is it correct to teach and ask students to do little vinyasa, not so many vinyasa, and gradually ask to do more? Is it correct for them not to be too much tired? And Pattabhi Joy says, no, I telling beginners, you start one Surya Namaskar 3 times, like the first one, Surya Namaskar A. Second Surya Namaskar 3 times. You do first day, 1 week, stop. Don't take asana. So he's saying, do just Surya Namaskar and then eventually add on asana. You complete, stop. Tomorrow, take. 1 week, same Surya Namaskar. After some improvement, second week, he's adding postures. So he's just explaining the process of adding postures as such. So he says, same method, you take practice, only for one place. I'm coming for 1 month. So this is interesting where he's talking about his pedagogical reasoning. Only for one place I am coming for 1 month, or 1.5 months, 1 week or 2 weeks, I will be staying. That is why that method. So he's talking about only being able to teach for a short period of time, even in an immersion kind of scenario over a month or so. So that's why he's saying he conducts led classes. It's a means for getting through all the asanas and going so in a logical and systematized way. Again, this is sort of like, why did Krishnamacharya teach in that specific context at the Mysore Palace? Why did he teach the young athletic practitioners attending the group classes in such a way that was kind of like a asana drill sequence as such? And in most other contexts, he was not prioritizing the need to practice 70 asanas at that, or even necessarily doing such weight-bearing asanas between or weight-bearing transitional movements between asanas themselves, because that was tailor-making practice that's appropriate to the individual, what is perfect to that individual. The perfect ideal practice is not something let's assume to be written on palm leaves, that's designating an entire sequence of postures as such, if you think about it in that line of thinking. In any case, just going on with Pattabhi Joyce clarifying his pedagogical reasoning here. That is why you come to India. I take it same method. You can understand. That is why different here teaching and India teaching different. But one asana is perfect. Next asana, I'm telling. So once you perfect one asana, this methodology of getting the next asana. To a certain extent, Vinyasa Krama implies this, where things are learned gradually in a step-by-step process. In any case, the next question that I bring up is, when is it good to do full vinyasa? That is coming back to samastiti after each asana. Is it correct? So this is, again, what we're talking about. Yogamala alludes to each asana actually having the full vinyasa to samastiti. It says, take the same sequence that you do to come to Paschimottanasana, and then take the same sequence coming out of it. It says that. And that's also what Krishnamacharya is saying in Yoga Makaranda. Whereas the way Ashtanga Vinyasa tends to be practiced is half vinyasa. So Pattabhi Joyce answers, yes, correct. Take one asana, finish it. So do the full, the sequence, the vinyasa sequence out of it. After full vinyasa, you do standing position, samastiti. Again, next. So then the next posture from samastiti, you must necessarily come to the ground and perform the next posture. This is an explicit way of performing this, where every single asana does have samastiti, but then he explains when to adapt that. Your strength, how is you? So depending on your strength, you should do half or full vinyasa, right? Without strength, so that's the sixth vinyasa, shat, stop. Okay, so he's saying that's half vinyasa. You jump back, Chaturanga Dandasana, Urdhva Mukha Svanasana, then Adho Mukha Svanasana. and not necessary to come forward to stand and then only to jump back again to do the dog poses again in order to come sit. So he's saying if strength is not there, you can stop it at the sixth position, which is Adho Mukha Svanasana. And once one is increasing in strength, you can do full vinyasa. But then he says, now there is no time. There's too many students, right? So this is another reasoning for, again, his pedagogical rationale for why he's come to conduct classes in a certain way. That is why I'm telling you, one asana, for example, Paschimottanasana has 16 vinyasas. And with the 9th is the state of the asana. Purvottanasana has 15 vinyasas. These are steps, kramas. But so he's just explaining different asanas have a different number of vinyasas because they're referring the full vinyasa from samastiti as such. You're doing full vinyasa all. That is the best. Secondary, with the 6th vinyasa, all the asanas is coming. That's half vinyasa. That you're changing this time. When your strength is more, you're changing that time. 6th, 7th, and then Paschimottanasana do after 8, 9, then jumping again, Shat position, the 6th position, you go. Every day teaching now, same method you do, both is no problem. Both is no problem, so full vinyasa or half vinyasa. And then also you can say the way he was teaching Nancy Gilgoff, not doing necessarily vinyasa between each and every single posture, but perhaps grouping, book ending, group of postures as such, like much in the same way that Ramaswamy Sir teaches. Book ending it with this lead in from samastiti and to samastiti. It's either explicit or implied that samastiti is the starting and ending point. Method is good, no problem. Then he's talking about if one is to do full vinyasa, it adds time, right? It adds time to the practice, so it becomes unrealistic. And he's saying you're a working individual. You're not spending all the time on yoga practice. And again, it's true, like the point being that people are coming to this practice as householders. And even renunciants, you have to ask the question, are they really spending so much time on asanas? You have to keep in mind that a renunciant has certain perspective on the greater scheme. So asanas is one small part of 8. Ashtanga, of course, is an 8-limbed practice. The limbs of yoga that Patanjali delineates 8 in number. Asana is one of them. And it's all meant to be leading to concentration, sitting for meditation, and cultivating the capacity, excuse me, to sit in absolute absorption, complete absorption, that is samadhi, the extent of concentration, as Alamelu so beautifully expressed as part of that excerpt from the documentary I brought up. So again, this also helps to frame contextually, what are we doing with practice? If you want to focus on the physical, sure, go ahead, practice, be my guest. There's a great number of benefits to be gained from that, but there's also the importance of studying the mind, developing peace of mind. Asanas only get you there part ways. Meditation itself is important and is part of this process for the householder. It brings in peace of mind. And pranayama is an important step that gets you to meditation. It renders the mind fit for meditation, as Patanjali puts it. So don't avoid pranayama. It's an important practice. So anyways, this is a Pattabhi Jois expressing how it could take 5 hours if you're going to do full vinyasa, he's saying. And it's the same thing, like if you're going to do long breathing, it'll inherently take longer. So he's making certain choices based on time and on the realistic assumption that people are householders. So, and whether to do full vinyasa or half vinyasa, or perhaps if you do less vinyasas, like Nancy Gilgoff says she learned from Pattabhi Jois in 1973 as such, and the way, like I said, the Ramaswamy Sir typically conducts practice as such. Fewer vinyasas, so not necessarily between every single asana, but more so bookending a given group of floor asanas can save on time. And it can allow for more exploration into long breathing, if you will. So anyways, there's all these different ways of looking at it. So he's saying, yeah, shortcut. Half vinyasa is a shortcut. This is another question here. So someone at this workshop was asking if he should stay longer in Kurmasana or in back bendings. You give some timing, like 10 breaths for Kurmasana. You give 3 times 5 breaths for Urdhva Dhanurasana. The postures mentioned are of little importance. The point that he gets to is that you can give more attention to different asanas depending on one's intention in a given practice. Again, it's also and like from the preceding, sometimes a choice is made based on time that is available, right? And the same thing goes for longer breathing. So if you want to essentially practice a full series of 70 plus asanas in a reasonable amount of time, say 90 minutes, you likely will have to conduct the breath in a particular manner in order to go through it at a particular pace in order to complete a complete series, full series like as such. So there's choices being made, right? And that's not to say that practicing long and only doing fewer asanas, it becomes an incomplete practice. That's to view with a short-sighted lens about what long breathing actually gives us, right? Again, go back to what Alamelu, the middle daughter of Krishnamacharya's, what she said about this, focusing on the exhalation and the movement and this cultivating this concentration, serving towards one's eventual goal of sitting for meditation and getting to a state of complete absorption, if one is to attain that in this janma, in this lifetime. But anyways, it's just interesting. So Pattabhi Jois is saying, I'm telling all the asanas, you take practice how long your strength is. So there. Again, he's talking about strength. If you have more strength, you can do full vinyasa to samastiti, whatever. But also about time. He's also talking about time in the preceding question. You can bring that in here, or intention. If you're focusing on a particular asana for a particular physical effect, like Paschimottanasana is an important asana that Hatha Pradipika even says vaset. Vaset, meaning stay. You stay in the asana. And the way Krishnamacharya would then say is that Paschimottanasana is an important asana that one can stay for a given period of time. And so it all depends. That's something Deshakachara famously would say, actually. It all depends. So here, Pattabhi Jois is saying, long time he is doing 100 asanas you do. One asana is perfect. So he's saying, even if you do one asana, because then he says, long time you sitting Kurmasana is long time. 3 hours is possible. One asana is perfect. So he's saying you don't have to do a full series. So this is interesting, right? But people choose to do the full series because it makes for a sense of completion of a given practice. I understand. But you can see what Pattabhi Jois is alluding to here, that it's not necessary that you can do even one asana. And now one might experience a Deshikachar lineage class and say, well, it doesn't feel complete, especially if one is coming from Ashtanga Vinyasa. But you have to understand that what makes a complete practice, the point of view in Deshikachar teachings and Ramaswami's teachings, is not having completed 70 asanas. It's more so to the effect of what kinds of movements were present in the practice. Of course, there has to be certain movements that are applicable to the individual, the types of movements that are serving that individual for their need of the moment. So, but if you categorize movements in broad categories, like the forward flexion of the spine, that's exhale oriented, or the extension of the spine, stretching of the anterior portion, that's inhale oriented, so the bending forward bending, or the back bending. What other possibilities of movements are there? The lateral stretch of the spine, or the twisting of the spine. These are some of the possible movements. There's not much else, really. This is pretty much either bending forward, you're bending back, you're stretching the spine laterally that way, or you can do a twisting movement. So these are some of the basic things. So if you're covering these broad classes of movements, that can be said to make for a rounded practice. Indeed, Ramaswamy also talks about the planes of movement. Deshikachar also talks about that. What makes for a rounded practice? So postures could be either standing, seated, or lying down. Lying down has two categories. Could be lying face up, supine, or lying face down, prone. And of course, there's also like an inverted, like the body being in an inverted position, etc. But in any case, what makes for a well-rounded practice is probably having some standing, some seated, some lying down, being on your back, being on your belly. The primary series has vinyasas between each asana. So you're doing Urdhva Mukha Svanasana, but it's sort of a different energy when you do postures that occur at the start of the intermediate series, like Shalabhasana, or perhaps even Bhujangasana. Maybe not the advanced Bhujangasana that occurs in an advanced series in Ashtanga Vinyasa, but like a more mild Bhujangasana, like a baby cobra. But Shalabhasana to Dhanurasana, very helpful prone position. So if you're touching on various areas and not going to an extreme necessarily, you could still have a sense of a rounded practice, having gone through different things. The prone positions are working on the stretching of the anterior body. The seated positions, predominantly, they're the nature of bending forward, but there is also possibility of twisting. And inherently, you can do a counter pose by bending back from the seated position. So there's a variety of movements one can do within a given plane of movement. That's what Ramaswamy teaches. You can perform all sorts of movements while standing simply in samastiti, right? And this so-called Tadasana sequence. The same thing in Trikonasana, or like spreading of the feet apart. So like you could bend in a lateral, in a lateral manner, or you can do a twisted manner, or all sorts of asanas from this category of feet apart. You can do bending forward, like Parshvottanasana. You can even bend the spine more backward, so like Virabhadrasana. So you're covering all the bases just in that one standing category. So you don't necessarily have to do all of the positions in the feet apart, nor with the feet together, although the feet together, Ramaswamy tends to emphasize as a very good start to practice, even before doing Surya Namaskar, doing all sorts of movements whilst having the feet together in Samastiti. So doing all these kinds of movements is helpful in a sort of Tadasana sequence to start. One need not start their practice standing in any case, but this is just as an example, and it's commonplace where we typically would start standing. But yeah, so even standing with the feet together, you can perform all the such movements. Bend the spine back, or bend the spine laterally, twist the spine, bend forward. Those are the four main movements, all from this one standing group of feet together, Tadasana. Anyways, so what else did I want to say? So anyways, I'll stop share of this particular document. And go to this other document. Or actually, yeah, so I'll do that. So again, if we re-examine what Pattabhi Jois himself is saying, he's often alluding to long breathing, 10-second inhale, 10-second exhale, 15-second inhale, 15-second exhale, this sort of thing. And here he's talking about yoga as an internal process, and it's having much to do with the breath as such. The benefits are gained through the breathing. It's not, you don't gain benefits of the asana without doing weight-bearing transitional movements. It's really to do with the breathing. This is a way to frame it. So even here in Pattabhi Jois's own words, he's emphasizing breath. And now, what of this individual, Thomas Zorzo? Tomás Zorzo, he's a Spanish yoga teacher. He's a student of Pattabhi Jois, but I remember hearing him give a talk where he explains his practice started actually with a pupil of Deshikachar's, in which there was a long breathing practice, and then after he went to India and found Pattabhi Jois's school and was learning Ashtanga Vinyasa, and he became a senior Ashtanga Vinyasa teacher. So let me pull up that screen now. But he came from this background of having experienced Deshikachar teachings, which is long breathing focused. So here he is, Thomas Zorzo. So he studied with Pattabhi Jois subsequently, and he even started a school. And what he talks about, at least in this talk, he was bringing up how he was finding that the Ashtanga sequence wasn't applicable to some of his students, some populations. So he wanted to know how one is to adapt. So he sought out other teachers, and he was highlighting in this particular talk his time learning from Deshikachar afterward, in which he learned ways to adapt practice so one gets a rounded practice without having to do a complete series as such. And also he talks about once he was learning from Pattabhi Jois, he was continuing with this long breathing that he had learned initially with this pupil of Deshikachar's. I forgot who that was exactly, but he was instructed into this long breathing initially. So when he was then doing Ashtanga Vinyasa, he was kind of continuing to do that in the Mysore room. And he speaks of Pattabhi Jois walking around the room, helping the students and he came to Thomas, and what Thomas says, he says that Pattabhi Jois would observe his breathing, and he said, "Ah, Thomas, breathing good." Right, so that's an indication that's a good way of practicing with this long breathing. So I thought that's actually quite interesting in that regard. And he doesn't strictly teach Ashtanga Vinyasa. He teaches also Dashakachara influenced Vini Yoga type classes and Chikitsa as such. Chikitsa Krama, not necessarily meaning the primary series in Ashtanga Vinyasa, but rather the Chikitsa Krama approach seen in Krishnamacharya teachings as through Dashakachar and what Ramaswamy Sir alludes to as well. A.G. Mohan also. So in any case, I just wanted to add that about Tamas Zorzo and the breathing. So he still teaches Ashtanga too, just he has a varied palette of teaching. I'll stop share. I'll also note at this point that evidently it should be said, Pattabhi Jois wasn't assisting all of his students, and it wasn't helping all of his students. In some instances, he was hurting them. So it's an unfortunate aspect of the history that I don't want to dwell on in this presentation, but it's important to note in any case. So here, I'll go back to the screen I had, or actually, what about this practice of the full series as such? How do we reconcile it then, if Krishnamacharya otherwise wasn't teaching in this way? Well, look at the next topic is BKS Iyengar. So just look at BKS Iyengar in his even in 1938. This is a very interesting silent newsreel that we see demonstrations of a young BKS Iyengar, along with his teacher, Sri T. Krishnamacharya, and even Krishnamacharya's wife, which is evidently Iyengar's older sister, who would have been a formidable yoga teacher herself, you know. And also two of Krishnamacharya's small children, Alamelu among one of them, demonstrating asanas. It was for the propagation of yoga. It's called yoga propaganda, and to a large extent, Krishnamacharya would speak of advanced asana in this way. That advanced asana is more to do with demonstration for the sake of propaganda. Indeed, the Yoga Makaranda is speaking to the need for getting Krishnamacharya's fellow countrymen and women to practice yoga, to take up their cultural practices again that have been falling into obscurity, in no small part due to British occupation of India at the time. You know, it's a fact of the history that we have to understand. So he was urging people to take on the practice and using certain demonstration approaches as a means to propagate the yoga, to get people inspired as a form of propaganda, yoga propaganda. So not that the advanced asanas are important in and of themselves, but they can be a means for, one, preserving the art of Vinyasa Krama, but also two, as a means to sort of inspire people through a show of yoga propaganda. So anyways, this is a young BKS Iyengar in 1938 alongside his teacher and his older sister and his young nieces. So here he's going to do Ekapada Shirshasana sequence in Vinyasa Krama as such. So I'm not exactly sure if the video is slowed down. If it is, I don't think it's by much because the movement of the trees seems rather natural. Just to assess the quality of the movements and the breathing. So it's not terribly fast what we're seeing, whether it be real time or if it's slightly slowed down as a result of the degradation of the film. I don't think it's slowed down though. The movement seems rather natural. Perhaps that seemed slowed down. I mean, it's possible it is somewhat slowed down, but it still seems rather natural. It doesn't seem. You could tell maybe from the jumping movements, the video seems to have been slightly slowed down, perhaps. So, anyways, it's very impressive, fantastic asanas. And then we eventually see, like a lot of these asanas, the Ashtanga Vinyasa folks will be familiar with. In any case, then we see a demonstration from the professor himself. So he performs variations that are not found in any of the Ashtanga Vinyasa series. And there are variations that we do see in Krishnamacharya's later teachings to his pupils, Swami Sir. And I mean, even BKS Iyengar taught some of these variations that are not found in any Ashtanga Vinyasa series. So here, I don't think the video is slowed down. And again, it's for demonstration purposes. So he's making certain movements a little more dramatic. The whole point here is demonstration, right? It's to catch the viewer. But he comes up in a very controlled manner with the correct breathing. That sudden dramatic movement is quite interesting. But again, I take that to be specifically for the purpose of demonstration. Otherwise, such movements, it could be almost like watching paint dry, like I said, which is more the spirit of, it seems, what he intended practice to actually be in practice. Anyways, very lovely demonstration of the professor himself in 1938. From another angle, there's also the professor's wife, whom is Iyengar's older sister. We'll see her doing some variation, standing on the head. These are Krishnamacharya's young daughters. Here to the right is Alamelu, who we saw speaking earlier. So for children, they're moving at a certain pace. But Iyengar, it seemed like he was moving slower now, wasn't it? And even Krishnamacharya, to a certain extent, he's carefully moving to the positions. Very, very nice document here. They perform backbending, etc. Krishnamacharya supporting one of his daughters as she does some postures stand on his feet, like so. And Iyengar continues. Then there's also some more with the professor from the shoulder stand. This is the professor's wife, Namat Giriyama. Just doing Parigasana. Here she's doing Parivrita variation of Upavishta Konasana. Is a variation not found in the Ashtanga Vinyasa series. And she's holding the big toes, so it's a funny detail that sometimes in Ashtanga circles, there's some that believe that Upavishta Konasana is only correct or classical if you're holding the outside of the heels. But is the professor wrong? Is the professor's wife wrong? I don't know. So she's doing some very fantastic asanas also in her own respect. In any case, I'll stop share of that. So for the purpose of demonstration, then it perhaps can start to make sense the nature of what's it called? These series, where they came about, why they came about in such a manner. So if we just I'll share screen again. So here I'll actually fast forward 30 times just to even quickly go through the series and see it in its entirety at a glance. So it's going through all of these standing variations. It's for the purpose of demonstration, I would say. Is it necessary to go through all of the variations? Trikonasana, Parshvakonasana, Prasarita Padottanasana, Parshvottanasana, Utkatasana, or even like the Uttitahasta Parangushtasana and Ardha Baddha Padmottanasana. And then Utkatasana, Virabhadrasana. It's pretty much all of the standing with the feet apart postures, and a couple of the ones standing on one leg. And then finally to the floor, performing the all-important Paschimottanasana. And then variations on that, doing asymmetrically. It's seemingly an entire syllabus of postures. And that's how I would tend to characterize the various series in Ashtanga Vinyasa. It's essentially an entire syllabus of postures. And it doesn't seem to be indicative of what Krishnamacharya otherwise was asking people to practice for their day's practice. Nevertheless, people do practice in this manner today, and it's stemming from the asana drill system that he was teaching to the young practitioners like Pattabhi Jois and BKS Iyengar during that period. So the ending sequence here. So now the movements these positions are held longer. The inversions is treated as important, along with Paschimottanasana. They're important procedures that even BKS Iyengar expressed importance in, Paschimottanasana and the two inversions. So anyways, stop the share of that. So let's, like we saw a young BKS Iyengar, let's now get back to the topic at hand, Surya Namaskar finally, and now examining BKS Iyengar in that regard. So I'll share screen. So when you look at BKS Iyengar's Light on Yoga from 1966, you might not be able to discern Surya Namaskar occurring there as such, but it does occur at the end of his course 1. There's a small instance where he pays mention to it and describes the basic sequence. He says, those who wish to prostrate to the sun, Surya Namaskar in parentheses, and to develop the arms and chest can do the following asanas in sequence, at first for 6 rounds, increasing the number according to capacity. So here he's showing more so something that looks like Surya Namaskar A in Pattabhi Jois's presentation, not the Surya Namaskar B. So more so something that resembles this. But here we have Samastiti, then raise the arms. Then we have Uttanasana, Chaturanga Dandasana, Urdhva Mukha Svanasana, Adho Mukha Svanasana, then Uttanasana, and then raise the arms and then come back to Samastiti. What we see described by Iyengar is very similar except for one small difference, interestingly enough. He says start in what he calls Tadasana, which is essentially Samastiti. And if you look, Iyengar himself says it is also called Samastiti. He just tends to call it Tadasana, but there's instances where him or his daughter Gita are referring to it as Samastiti. But in any case, so Tadasana 1, Uttanasanas 2. So here there's 8 positions. In Pattabhi Jois's presentation of Surya Namaskar A, he calls for 9 positions. So that's the difference. Remember what I said earlier, there's 12 Vedic mantras and also 12 names for the sun god. Whereas here, the Surya Namaskar A is in 9 positions. Ekam, Dve, Trini, Chotwari, Pancha, Shat, Sapta, Ashto, Nava, and then Samastiti. Whereas here he indicates 8 positions, but some are given 2 asanas in a given numbering. So Tadasana, Uttanasana, he didn't delineate the raising of the arms. In any case, the first position, he's calling that 1. And then Chaturanga Dandasana has 3 instead of 4. But incidentally, the 2 variants of Uttanasana, the half Uttanasana and then the full Uttanasana, are indicated. This is where in Ashtanga Vinyasa they would call for raising of the arms as Ekam, bending forward as Dve, and then Trini, inhale, look up. They're enunciating that as a separate number itself. Chaturanga Dandasana, and he gives 2 plates to examine, one with the standing on the toes and one where you roll over the toes to be on the tops of the feet, which is then in preparation for what's to come, the 5th position here, so or the 4th position here. So moving from Chaturanga Dandasana to Urdhva Mukha Svanasana. But then what he indicates here is dipping back down to Chaturanga Dandasana, incidentally. This is the one detail that you would say that is not in the Surya Namaskar presentation by Pattabhi Jois, interestingly enough. So he counts fewer asanas, 8 instead of 9, as Pattabhi Jois counts in his presentation of Surya Namaskar A. But incidentally, Iyengar is including an additional Chaturanga Dandasana. So Tadasana 1, Uttanasana 2, which has the two types of Uttanasana, Ardha Uttanasana and Purna Uttanasana, and then Chaturanga Dandasana 3, Urdhva Mukha Svanasana 4, and go back to Chaturanga Dandasana. So he's saying go back. That's the fifth one he's calling for. And then the sixth position, in any case, is Adho Mukha Svanasana. That's the same for Pattabhi Jois. Shat is Adho Mukha Svanasana position. And then 7, again, there's two types of Uttanasana, but he's giving it just the one number, 7, and then come up to Tadasana. So this extra instance of dipping down, how is he doing for the breathing in any case? Inhale once you're standing in Samastiti, exhale, bend forward to Uttanasana, and then inhale. So the pictures, like he says 47, 48, plates 47, 48, but you're exhaling and then you're inhaling. So it makes sense that the first movement, in fact, is the full expression, and then the inhale to look up, as we do see in the Surya Namaskar A presentation. Pattabhi Jois. The first is the full Uttanasana, and the second on inhale is looking forward. Then what follows is an exhale movement, Chaturanga Dandasana. So that he says exhalation, then inhalation for Urdhva Mukha Svanasana. And then he says exhalation to, instead of going to Adho Mukha Svanasana, he's saying going to Chaturanga Dandasana. Then necessarily one must do an additional inhale in that position in order to then exhale into Adho Mukha Svanasana, which is typically an exhale-oriented movement. And then inhalation to Uttanasana. So here the first one being Ardha Uttanasana makes sense. It's that's the way it's indicated in Pattabhi Jois's presentation of Surya Namaskar. And then here it's indicated after that inhalation in Uttanasana, exhalation to come to Tadasana, but it seems to be a typo. Because then you see other presentations of Surya Namaskar in Iyengar teachings where it makes more sense to how you would expect it to come up on inhale rather, and then exhale to just lower your arms to Samastiti in any case. So this extra instance of dipping down, what about that? Pattabhi Jois didn't indicate that, and it's not indicated in Yoga Makaranda in the transition to come to Paschimottanasana. What's indicated is just from Samastiti coming to Chaturanga Dandasana, Urdhva Mukha Svanasana, Adho Mukha Svanasana, and then jump forward, etc. And then the same coming out, jumping back to Chaturanga Dandasana, Urdhva Mukha Svanasana, and then going to Adho Mukha Svanasana without this extra instance of dipping down before you jump forward to the next posture. But in any case, let's go back to the primary series video. And I'll draw your attention to a couple of practitioners here.
Ekam inhale, dve exhale, त्रीणि inhale head up, चत्वारि jump back, पंच inhale, षट् exhale, breathe, look your navel.
So here you saw the group to the left, they did go straight to Adho Mukha Svanasana, but the group to the right, there's at least two people, Maria Zradi and Chuck Miller, who also were influenced by Iyengar. They do the extra dip. So hopefully this one will see them.
Jump back. Pancha inhale. षट् exhale.
See that extra dip down, but they're incidentally moving through Chaturanga Dandasana and Adho Mukha Svanasana on a single exhalation to match the breathing that Pattabhi Jois is calling for. different than what Iyengar is calling for, to take a breath in after the exhale in Chaturanga, in order to then move to Adho Mukha Svanasana necessarily on the exhale. So Madi Ezrati and Chuck Miller do this extra dip down.
One.
If we see another example, you'll see it as well.
Ekam, inhale.
You see Chuck Miller there too. I'll just go back.
Jump back. Pancha, inhale. Shat, exhale.
So it's an interesting thing. It's not in Yogamala and Pattabhi Jois's writings in Yogamala. And also, even in David Swenson, for that matter. Let me pull that up real quick. So David Swenson also seems to add that extra.
And we're now ready. Surya Namaskara A. Inhale, both arms up with a full breath. Look up at your hands. Exhale, fold forward, lower your head. Inhale, look up. Exhale, take your feet back, lower, remember your options. Inhale, upward dog. Exhale, downward facing dog position. And full deep breathing.
So you saw him do that extra dip down to Chaturanga Dandasana. Interestingly enough, it gives an extra opportunity to build strength, I guess. So I'll stop share of that. Now going back to the Iyengar presentation here. Oops, let's share screen now. Hang on. I need to go back to the Zoom app to do that. Zoom app, share screen. So now, this is at a glance, all of the frames in question. If you go to the pages where those frames are described, there's all these explanations for each of the positions. So there's more detail in that regard than what is given in the Surya Namaskar descriptions in Pattabhi Jois's book. In fact, even Krishnamacharya's book, he gives a whole explanation for Chaturanga Dandasana, even a whole explanation for Uttanasana. So it's not just indicated. Number 2 is Uttanasana, and then inhale to look up. Number 3, and then the 4th is exhale, Chaturanga Dandasana, and then just going in sequential manner, like Krishnamacharya's Yoga Makaranda does give an explanation specifically individually for Uttanasana or even for Chaturanga Dandasana. So it's interesting to compare. I would say that Iyengar's writing here owes in no small part to his learning from Krishnamacharya. I know Iyengar likes to frame himself as being someone who's innovating, and he did in large part, and how he contributed greatly to the teachings and describing the technique. But you could see even in Krishnamacharya's Yoga Makaranda, he's giving a lot of information there. Even the benefits to the postures are given in Krishnamacharya's Yoga Makaranda. Later on, Pattabhi Jois talks about purported benefits for each individual asana of the primary series itself. So Chaturanga Dandasana. Remember, in Krishnamacharya's Yoga Makaranda, he's even indicating when showing the posture itself, he's saying you can stay in the one posture for a period of several minutes even, so breathing in the posture, which is not something you see in Ashtanga Vinyasa, but you do of course see that as a possibility in BKS Iyengar. Stay in the pose for about 30 seconds with normal or deep breathing. Or here too, stay in the pose from half a minute to a minute, so he's breathing. Same thing in Adho Mukha Svanasana, you could technically stay in each position for a given duration of time. And then just for the sake of going through it, I also wanted to show, okay, because we saw how this inherently can lead to sitting on the floor in Dandasana and then proceeding with Paschimottanasana. And necessarily the counterpose Purvottanasana, I wanted to include that as well, what V.K.S. Iyengar has to say about these positions. Now, just to compare in brief by looking at Krishnamacharya's writings. From Yoga Makaranda, 1934. Iyengar's Light on Yoga, of course, is 1966. So now we're looking at 1934, Krishnamacharya. Uttanasana is described. So we have Samastiti. Again, the inhale of raising the arms is not shown, but it's inferred, of course. Like in V.K.S. Iyengar's book, which in later presentations by V.K.S. Iyengar and his daughter Gita, you can see it's clearly that it's meant that one necessarily inhales and raises the arm first before necessarily bending down to Uttanasana. And here too, I would say that the first picture indicated is Ardha Uttanasana and then Purna Uttanasana, Adho, like that, the downward facing Uttanasana, Adho Mukha. But if you read the description, of course, it says, so afterwards, while exhaling the breath out slowly, it's indicated slowly, breathing out slowly, even in Yoga Makaranda. Bend the upper part of the body, that is the part above the hip, little by little, right? And place the palms down by the legs. It's indicated slowly, even here. The knees must not be even slightly bent. Of course, this is referring for like a strict classical way of approaching. If you're approaching, if you're teaching someone that has mobility issues, Krishnamacharya obviously was adapting. You can see this. He was not demanding they do Ashtanga Vinyasa series, you know. He was not doing this for Indra Devi even during these same Mysore years. I'm just bringing this up as facts that of the history of it, not to say Ashtanga Vinyasa is inferior or anything. I'm just saying these are the facts. Not to say you cannot practice Ashtanga Vinyasa, that it's not possible. Of course, it's possible. Anyways, what else does he say? So you would have bent forward and then raise the head upwards to fix the gaze on the tip of the nose. While doing this, draw in clean air through the nostril. So exhale to bend forward necessarily, but then inhale to look forward. That's the second movement, except the pictures are indicated Ardha Uttanasana first, and then the full expression, Adho Mukha, or Purna, the complete Uttanasana afterward. And then, of course, Chaturanga Dandasana. So like here in Uttanasana, he must say you can stay for several breaths. In any case, we did see that in Chaturanga Dandasana. Draw the breath in while raising the head. So he's indicating you can dynamically breathe in this posture, moving between Ardha Uttanasana and the Adho Mukha Uttanasana. Otherwise, Chaturanga Dandasana, stay for even 15 minutes, he says, if you can hold it for 15 minutes. And then this has 4 vinyasas. Usually this is pancha in Joyce's presentation, but here he's saying there's 4 vinyasas. You follow the first 3 from Uttanasana, and then you jump back straight away into Urdhva Mukha Svanasana, skipping Chaturanga Dandasana. And the benefit is indicated. You can stay for 15 minutes in this pose, he says, even. Right. So then after Adho Mukha Svanasana, you can stay for 15 minutes as well for any of these positions. Even here, he says you could jump straight from Uttanasana to Adho Mukha Svanasana. bypassing Chaturanga Dandasana and Urdhva Mukha Svanasana. But then, when he's describing Paschimottanasana, he says this asana has many kramas. Of these, the first form has 16 vinyasas. That's exactly the number of steps involved that Pattabhi Jois explains in Yogamala. The 9th being the asana sthiti, the actual asana. So he says the first 3 vinyasas are exactly as for Uttanasana. The 4th vinyasa is Chaturanga Dandasana. So here he's indicating to get to Paschimottanasana, then you would do those 3 together. Chaturanga Dandasana, then Urdhva Mukha Svanasana as the 5th, Pancha, and then Adho Mukha Svanasana as the 6th, Shat. And then 7th is jumping forward, arriving to the seated position. That's Dandasana as shown here. This is an older photograph, like an older Krishnamacharya in this photograph. Extending the legs, and then so on and so forth. So 7, holding the big toes is 8, and then of course bending forward is 9. Nava, that's the state of the asana. Then you're in Paschimottanasana. And he gives a series of benefits. This will cure all diseases related to the stomach. This asana can be done on the floor or on a mat, according to the capabilities of one's body. So he's even giving this option, right? You can sit up on a height. Anyways, learn some of the other forms of Paschimottanasana krama by studying the pictures carefully. So he gives different variations of holding the feet. You can hold the big toes with the elbows out like this, or you can drop them down, or you can grab the opposite wrist from around the feet. And Iyengar shows many such variations too. You also see this in Pattabhi Jois's presentation, that there's different ways of holding the feet. Pregnant women should not do this asana. So he's indicating, even in 1934, his willingness to teach women. It's not that he was not willing to teach women. When Indra Devi came to him, he was probably unwilling to teach a foreigner or a foreign woman. But he was saying women are entitled to practice yoga. It wasn't a man's only practice. Even here he's indicating in 1934. So for this asana, not appropriate for a woman that is pregnant. But then he says can be done up to the 3rd month of pregnancy. Of course, certain things need to be taken into consideration. For men, there are no restrictions to practicing this asana. If this is practiced every day without fail for 15 minutes, even staying in Paschimottanasana for 15 minutes. Remember, Hatha Pradipika is saying, Vaset, stay in the asana. All the bad diseases of the stomach will be removed. So it's a particular emphasis on the stomach. An important asana. It's interesting. Yoga Makaranda doesn't have all of the asanas. It's meant to give us a snapshot. So even Purvattanasana is not described in Yoga Makaranda. Of course, we see the Purvattanasana described in Pattabhi Jois's Yogamala, or in B.K.S. Iyengar's Light on Yoga. But later, I mean, if we look, this is the sequence, of course. Chaturanga, Urdhva Mukha Svanasana, Adho Mukha Svanasana, and then jump forward in Paschimottanasana, and then coming out. It's indicated when it comes out the same way. In the 10th vinyasa, raise the head, like so. Well, maybe this is the way we would see it in Ashtanga, raising the head this way. The 11th vinyasa, keep the hands on the ground, jump back. Then 12. So 11 is like Utpluti, lifting up. And then 12 is Chaturanga Dandasana, 13, Urdhva Mukha Svanasana, 14. That's Chaturdasha Chaturdasha for Adho Mukha Svanasana. And then jump forward to stand, come up to stand. Must be learned from a guru. You need a teacher. You can't learn it strictly from a book. But let me go back to Iyengar. So he gives the Purvottanasana as well. Let me go full screen. So a lot of description and the effects. This asana gives a detailed description of benefits. This asana tones the abdominal organs and keeps them free from sluggishness. It also tones the kidneys, rejuvenates the whole spine, and improves the digestion. A lot having to do with the mid region, the stomach. A good stay in this pose massages the heart, the spinal column, and the abdominal organs, which feel refreshed and the mind is rested. Due to the extra stretch given to the pelvic region, more oxygenated blood is brought there, and the gonad glands absorb the required nutrition from the blood. This increases vitality, helps to cure impotency, and leads to the sex control, like brahmachari. He's also talking about controlled sexual appetite. Anyways, Purvottanasana, what does he say? This is the opposite of Paschimottanasana. He says, this posture strengthens the wrists and ankles, improves the movement of the shoulder joints, and expands the chest fully. It gives relief from the fatigue caused by doing other strenuous forward bending asanas. So, and if we go back to Pattabhi Joy's Yogamala, he quotes from the Hatha Pradipika. What does it say? Principle among asanas, Paschimottanasana causes vital energy to be carried up the spine. As well, it should lead to the rising of the digestive fire. Jatara nalasya. So he's talking about digestive fire, jatara in the belly. Slenderness in the abdomen and freedom from sickness for all. So the digestive fire, metabolic process, it's having to do with the stomach, like Krishnamacharya alludes to, and B.K.S. Iyengar also talks about with the abdominal organs. Now, later on, like you saw, like here, this more or less resembles Pattabhi Joyce's presentation of Surya Namaskar A. But there's a distinction. There's a small distinction, right? Anyways, later on, it seems he decided to teach it in a different way. This is in 1990. A pupil of Iyengar's, Silva Mehra, and her two of her children co-wrote this book. So here, Iyengar started calling these movements as jumpings because they do involve jumping, as you saw in the Ashtanga Vinyasa video. There's jumping. Of course, one can step back or step forward, but the classical position being jumping. That's what's described in Yogamala and Krishnamacharya's Yoga Makaranda. So, actually, let me stop share. So now that we're looking at these Iyengar books, I'll bring them up here. So B.K.S. Iyengar's Light on Yoga, for that the pages that we just saw. Of course, for Krishnamacharya's Yoga Makaranda, there's this. And now for the Silva Mehra book that I just showed, that's called Yoga, the Iyengar Way. And this is the book. It's a really good book, actually, for Iyengar Yoga, because Light on Yoga doesn't show what he eventually focused on. This book does. It shows the myriad of different props possible, utilizing props. This is not so much shown in Light on Yoga. In fact, it's more so the classical asanas unsupported that are being shown in much the same way that you see in Krishnamacharya's book and in Pattabhi Joyce's book. So of course he was adapting with students that came to him in person, but in the book he was showing in the classical way. But yeah, so Yoga the Iyengar Way is a 1990 publication where they do show more of these variations of doing the poses with support. And also it gives a lot of detailed alignment instructions, stuff that he developed since the publication of his 1966 Light on Yoga. There's a lot of detail of alignment in Light on Yoga, but then there's even more that he developed afterward, for example. So here, now the sequence looks a bit different. Inhale to raise the arms, Urdhva Hastasana is what they're calling it. Uttanasana on exhale. Then inhale to look up. So this is like we see in Joyce's presentation. Evidently, Urdhva Hastasana without the head looking up. You could raise the head, but also is indicated keeping the head down. So that's interesting. This is actually like the way Ramaswamy tends to teach, is that the head doesn't raise for the raising of the arms necessarily. You could choose one or the other, you know. It's not. It's just depending what your intention is in a given practice. But then after the Uttanasana, jumping back, but here it's indicated to Adho Mukha Svanasana, then Urdhva Mukha Svanasana. So Ekam inhale, Dve exhale, Trini inhale, and then Chotwari exhale. Here is indicated Adho Mukha Svanasana. And then Pancha inhale, so it's the same fifth position, Urdhva Mukha Svanasana. But then again, like you saw in Iyengar's indication here, Chaturanga Dandasana occurring after Urdhva Mukha Svanasana. That is the case in this presentation. The Shat, the sixth position, being Chaturanga Dandasana. That's sort of the middle of the sequence at this point, and that's kind of the prostration occurring in the middle of the sequence. And then after Urdhva Mukha Svanasana occurring again as the seventh position, Sapta. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then Ashto being Adho Mukha Svanasana again as the opposite of Urdhva Mukha Svanasana. And then Nava jumping forward to Uttanasana, looking forward, and then Dasha exhaling. Is that right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Dasha exhale. And then inhale, come up. Urdhva Hastasana, as they're calling it. So that's 11 positions, if you want to call Tadasana then, or Samastiti as the 12th. So now there actually is 12 positions. Like I said, there's a Vedic mantra and there's the Laukika mantras, the 12 names of the sun, so 12 individual mantras. And here it's basically 12 positions, as opposed to what Joyce shows in Surya Namaskar A, that's only actually 9 positions. Of course, there's Surya Namaskar B, that's, what is it, 16 or 17 positions? I forget now. It's not terribly important, but anyways. 17, yeah. So the Surya Namaskar chant from the Vedas and the Laukika mantras, the 12 there's 12 mantras. Here there's the Surya Namaskar sequence was modified to have 12 positions. And there's even the indication that one can practice jumping to these postures as a sequence from Samastiti, going to Adho Mukha Svanasana, and then once you're in Adho Mukha Svanasana, jumping forward to come perform any of the seated postures, which is much in the same way you would expect in the Ashtanga Vinyasa series. So even Iyengar was teaching this, it's just more frequently he's focusing on the static holds the postures to work on the technique with all of the explanation of the precision of how to execute the technique. Otherwise, there's even this page indicating a rolling kind of dynamic movement that Iyengar sometimes would teach. Incidentally, like, these kinds of variations dropping back from the shoulder stand, this is something you see in what Krishnamacharya himself is demonstrating in the 1938 video. This is not a variation found in Ashtanga Vinyasa. But here, doing a dynamic movement, halasana to the, what Iyengar is calling Setubandha Sarangasana. Actually, if you look in Iyengar's book, he gives that the alternate name as Uttana Mayurasana, which is incidentally the name that Ramaswamy Sir refers to this posture, is the upward facing peacock. Or doing this kind of a dynamic movement, moving from Paschimottanasana to Halalasana, or Upavishta Konasana to Supta Konasana. These are movements that you'll be familiar with in Ashtanga Vinyasa in any case. Or the Halasana to this Uttana Mayurasana. It's an interesting instance of dynamic movement within Iyengar Yoga. And we'll circle back to this when I show some stuff from Ramaswamy. So now, the 2000 publication of Surya Namaskar from Gita S. Iyengar, the daughter of BKS Iyengar. So here, what does she say? The sun salutation is a part of daily religious prayer, which comes from time immemorial. Everyone, along with offerings and prayers, saluted the sun, since Surya, the sun god, has a tremendous solar energy, which is a vital need for mankind. Here is the well-known Surya Namaskar that gives mobility, alertness, speed, sharpness, and freedom while developing willpower and physical strength. Of course, the Western academics allude to the fact that Surya Namaskar is not documented in Yoga Shastras as a part of the practice, but it is part of Vedic culture, the act of prostration. So here it's just being integrated within the practice, the yoga practice. In fact, the commentator for the Hatha Pradipika, commentator Brahmananda, explains that something to avoid is doing too much Surya Namaskar because it depletes the energy. So again, that's an interesting point that Brahmananda is bringing up. Doing too much Surya Namaskar can be depleting. It becomes excessive at that point. Again, another case for why do it between every single asana then. Anyways, we're just friendly discussion on the topics, and I'm just providing different examples. So here, what Gita is indicating is what we saw in the Silva Mehta book of 10 years prior, 1990. So jumping back to Adho Mukha Svanasana, then Urdhva Mukha Svanasana, the middle of the sequence being Chaturanga Dandasana, which is standing in for prostration. Then Urdhva Mukha Svanasana, Adho Mukha Svanasana. And then jumping forward and standing up. The indication for the breathing is here. And then what's interesting is that she also includes mantras that are typically associated. You see here, that's 13 positions are given. If you count the first samastiti as one. Normally, I know that raising of the arms is ekam. So it depends where you start counting. This completes one cycle of Surya Namaskar. It can be repeated one after the other. Usually it is repeated 12 times, reciting the 12 names of the sun god, and then she gives the mantras. So here she's saying, repeat the sequence itself for 12 times. But there's incidentally 12 positions that formulate the sequence itself. I'll get back to this when I talk about Ramaswamy Sir in terms of Samantraka practice. Now, this is an interesting point. So this is probably one of the only instances that we see Samantraka practice described in an Iyengar source. But Iyengar teachers don't tend to teach this. I've been to a lot of Iyengar classes in my day. They don't typically teach Surya Namaskar with the mantras. Here it's incidentally just the Laukika mantras, not the Vedic mantras that Pattabhi Joyce brings up. Udyanadya mitra mahaha mitra or arohanuttaram divam hridrogam mama surya, like all those are the Vedic mantras. This is just the Laukika mantras. Om mitraya namaha, Om Ravaye namaha, Om Suryaya namaha. So there's 12 mantras. The way Ramaswamy teaches it is not doing 12 repetitions, because then Ramaswamy is also reminding what Brahmananda says. It's not necessary to do excessively 108 Surya Namaskaras. He's saying you could just do a couple of times, if you will, but do it really with a lot of focus and attention, with intention, not just as a mechanical physical exercise, but with this intention behind it. And the 12 individual positions, he teaches a different set of 12 positions that tends to resemble more what we see in Yoga Makaranda's transition sequence to the floor, or Pattabhi Joyce's presentation, Surya Namaskar A. But there's 12 positions in Ramaswamy's presentation, and he indicates chants for each of the positions. So each of the 12 positions gets their own chant. Om. So it has the Bija mantra and the Vedic mantra and the Laukika mantra. So that's Om Haram Udyanadya Mitra Mahaha Mitraya Namaha. Om Hrim Arohanuttaram Divam Ravaye Namaha. Om Hrum Hridrogam Mama Surya Suryaya Namaha. Om Hraim Harimananshaya Bhanave Namaha. Om Hram Shuke Shume Harimanam Khagaya Namaha. Om Hraha Ropanaka Sudadhamasi Pushne Namaha, and so on and so forth. That's half of the mantras. So it's just interesting. Samantraka practice. This is one of the only instances where you see an example in Iyengar Yoga, but like I said, it's not typically taught at all, really. It's unfortunate because it's actually quite a lovely aspect of the practice. And as we know in Ashtanga Vinyasa, the Surya Namaskar isn't typically taught with chanting per se as such either. She also indicates that you can practice different standing postures, jumping to different standing postures. So in the other source, we saw the possibility to jump to seated postures, but here Gita Iyengar is talking about how one can jump to different standing postures also. And incidentally, in Ashtanga Vinyasa, the way one enters Virabhadrasana typically is through the sequence. You step forward from Adho Mukha Svanasana. And then she shows also the intermediate variation. This is in the 2013 publication for the intermediate course. She shows another variation. Of course, the raising of the arms is not indicated, but it's there. Inhale and then necessarily exhaling to come to Uttanasana. Then inhale, exhale, jumping to Chaturanga Dandasana. Then inhale, then exhale, move to Adho Mukha Svanasana as an extra breath in order to then necessarily exhale into Adho Mukha Svanasana. And then she's saying exhale to Chaturanga Dandasana, so an inhale is missing there, of course, but the sequence is similar to what we saw in the preliminary course, except instead of jumping straight away to Adho Mukha Svanasana, she is indicating to jump to Chaturanga Dandasana, then moving to Adho Mukha Svanasana. See? So this is in the intermediate course. So if we go Ekam, inhale, Dve, exhale, Trini, if you look up, and then Chatwari, exhale, and then Pancha to come to this Adho Mukha Svanasana, and then Shat coming again to Chaturanga Dandasana. This is the middle of the sequence at this point. Then after that's Shat, the sixth, middle of the sequence, and then Sapta, inhaling to Urdhva Mukha Svanasana, and then Ashto coming again to Chaturanga Dandasana, and then Dasha coming to Adho Mukha Svanasana again, and then Eka Dasha, 11th, coming to Uttanasana, which there's two Uttanasana. Of course, you come forward, look forward, and then exhale, bend forward, and then inhale, come up. That's Dvadasha, and then Samastiti. What did I want to show? Yeah, before showing this, I want to show the examples in videos. So let me pull that up. Here we go. So I'll start with someone showing the preliminary. Note that these representations in the Silva Meta book and the Gita Iyengar preliminary course or the intermediate course, they no longer are looking at what BKS Iyengar published in 1966, which more so resembles what we see in Pattabhi Joyce's Yogamala, with that slight distinction where he includes an additional Chaturanga Dandasana. So anyways, let me share screen. No need for the audio. This is Yogi Zain. He's got a YouTube channel you could follow. He's an Iyengar certified teacher. I don't think it's fast forwarded. So he moves quite quickly into Uttanasana at this point in a dynamic circumstance scenario. So I'll count. He does again. That's a fast Uttanasana. That's way faster than you see in Ashtanga Vinyasa. So that was 2 seconds. That was 2 seconds. 1 second. That was 1 second. So he's not staying very long in any of these positions. Assuming he's doing it with the breath, that's a kind of a fast breathing. It might be fast forward, but it is typical when we've done Surya Namaskar in Iyengar classes that I've taken. They do tend to be rapid. Once people have learned the postures, then they just quickly call the sequence one after another, like so, which it starts to be kind of fast at that point. To me, again, it's a little unfortunate, but again, I have my bias and my preference for the long breathing, especially once I experienced that through Ramaswamy sir, I was like, wow, this seems like that's the way it should be done. But let me show another example. There's a channel from David Yearwood. He's an Iyengar certified teacher, where he's featuring another Iyengar certified teacher demonstrating. So he also shows how to do some of the standing positions as after arriving to Adho Mukha Svanasana, for example. But let's see. So Gary Yeager. That too, if I were to count, that's quite fast for Uttanasana. 3 seconds and then already inhaling and jumping back. So this is doing Chaturanga after Urdhva Mukha Svanasana, then going to the standing poses like Trikonasana. Proceeding from there, he goes to Parshva Konasana. It's not the typical way it's done in Iyengar Yoga, but they do offer this as an option. And even in Ashtanga Vinyasa, usually Trikonasana and Parshva Konasana are entered simply from Samastiti. Anyways, then he does the other side. So he's showing this as an example how you can enter the standing poses alternately from the sequence. But later the person videoing asks him to do it from this angle. So then he just does the Surya Namaskar without necessarily including the standing positions. So only 2 seconds on that last position. So
Thank you.
So it is typical in Iyengar Yoga when Surya Namaskar is sequence in a class. It's a fairly brisk pace. What's another example? This one here, also typical as seen in Iyengar Yoga. It's only 3 seconds of pose, 2 seconds of pose. Rather fast, 2-3 seconds of pose. It's typical in Iyengar Yoga, I'll say that. But initially, when it's being taught in Iyengar circles, they'll go through the process of explaining, as they do, each of the positions. So it could take longer for them to, and then they'll do it a few times, a workshop style. This is once the people have learned it, then it'll be called rapidly in sequence as such. Now, just to show what a typical Iyengar class does in terms of the Paschimottanasana in question. Here's a senior Iyengar Yoga teacher, Lois Steinberg, on the Roads to Bliss channel. It's a very good channel if you want to look up Iyengar Yoga. It's a typical example of how the alignment is instructed. The class is conducted as such.
Now, put the blankets back to center for Paschimottanasana. Adjust the backs of the thighs out. Come to the front of the buttock bones. If you need the strap, have that strap ready. Press the ankles, the shins, the knees, the thighs down. Inhale, raise your arms up. Bend from the top of the thigh. Hold the sides of the feet. Get the back ribs into the back, triceps up, side ribs long. Don't just throw the head like that. Now bend the elbows higher than the shoulders to your capacity. Bend forward, those who have the feet. Get the back ribs in, Shraddha. Spread the toes. Spread all the toes so there's a space between. Lengthen the legs forward. Move the dorsal in. Breathe. Who's breathing heavy? Breathe normal. Chin away from the sternum. Side ribs forward, back ribs in. And now inhale and come up. Bend the elbows high.
That's a recap there. So you can see that a lot of instruction is given. If we look at an example of Iyengar's daughter, Gita Iyengar, teaching, here's an example of her at a workshop in Italy. I'll share screen.
Your legs straight.
Stirate le vostre gambe in avanti.
So this video is actually 5 minutes.
Extending the legs,
I'm
put
just
your
going to
palms
show
on the
excerpts.
sides.
Stirate le gambe, mettete le mani ai lati del bacino.
Not Upavishta, Dandasana first.
Prima Dandasana.
Keep your lower back straight.
Tenete la vostra porzione lombare stirata.
Putting the palms on the sides of the buttocks, you have to move the lower sacrum region into the body.
Mettendo le mani, spingendo le mani ai lati del bacino, la parte inferiore del sacro deve essere assorbita dentro al bacino.
Extend the leg, inner leg.
Stirate l'interno delle gambe.
You know, when the legs settle, the buttocks, etc., will reveal whether they are correct or wrong.
Quando le gambe sono ben posizionate, queste riveleranno se le natiche sono ben posizionate.
Because you have stood for a longer time.
Perché voi
So anyways, just talking about Dandasana, not even Paschimottanasana, she's giving a lot of information before one is even getting to holding at the feet or the belt, as Lois Steinberg indicated. So only getting to the halfway into this video.
Putting the palms on the sides, lift the lower back, lower sacrum up.
e
Still Dandasana
sollevate la
at this
parte
point.
inferiore della colonna vertebrale su, il sacro su,
Extend your arms upward, open the side
allungate
chest.
le braccia su,
Elongate the side armpits.
allungate la parte laterale delle ascelle
Then exhale, take the hands forward, hold the
ed
feet.
espirando allungatevi in avanti
Hold the out edges of the feet so they don't get dropped.
e con le mani prendete la parte esterna dei piedi così non crollano verso il pavimento.
Those who cannot reach the foot, they may hold the toe. But when you can reach, you should hold the out edge.
Chi non riesce a prendere
So that's just goes on like that, and they remain in this concave phase of the back for the duration of this video. In fact, the video ends before they subsequently might fold forward. Evidently, in the beginners Iyengar classes, they often emphasize the concave phase of the forward bending postures to teach aspects of the posture before actually bending forward, which would benefit greatly from this exploration. So I'll stop share. So at this point, I think I'll stop the meeting. I'll end the meeting. So we got to look at Iyengar. I'll just go back to the screen share for the document itself. Just for a quick note of Iyengar speaking about Vinyasa Krama. So what changed in his teaching, where he emphasized more so, like the last two videos we saw, where these senior Iyengar teachers are teaching more of a static way of approaching the asanas, like Paschimottanasana as the example. So this article, this excerpt from this magazine, Ashtadala Yoga Mala. Instead of, this is BKS Iyengar talking in this article, instead of the vinyasa movements, I started to explore the inner visible hidden body and began explaining to my students the art of inner observation and penetration. This ignited interest and gathered momentum for yoga, and it gained respect. In the early days, even in performances all over the world, performances he would give demonstrations, I was performing with Vinyasa Krama, like that demonstration, the asana demonstration from the 1938 video that I showed, to show the external expressions and dynamism. It did attract the viewers. This is what I was talking about. The whole purpose of doing such demonstrations are for impressing the viewers and in a sort of a yoga propaganda approach. Then I began to demonstrate a few asana by jumpings, and then moved on to explain the inner action. The audiences started to admire these hitherto unheard of explanations. Since then, I started demonstrating and explaining more and more of the mind, intelligence, and consciousness, and how they percolate throughout the body in various presentations of the asana. I would certainly admit that I first attracted them towards this subject and then intelligized them to know the real depth. It's sort of an invented word, but let's go with him. The real depth of the subject that added respect to this art. So my view is that the sequential jumpings in asana end up only on the physical or peripheral level of the body, and vinyasa is a sequence to reach the ultimate or final state of the asana. However, whoever does jumpings gets stuck there only because his mind will be on jumpings and motions and not on aligning the intelligence or the exploration of the dark caves in the body. For me, alignment is stability, and entering the dark caves of the body is enlightenment. This is, of course, Iyengar's view. And so in a subsequent video, I might explain and unpack some of Iyengar's views about Vinyasa Krama. But this is his train of thought. He chose to explore more the technical precision of executing the asanas. But he did teach some jumpings as well. Not to say he didn't. But just his view of jumpings having to be something more superficial as opposed to this integration, as he puts it, or deep penetration into the understanding of the body through the asanas in his methodology. This is a way of him speaking to propose his methodology as something worthwhile to study. And he does give a lot more explanation into execution and technique than in other schools as deriving from Krishnamacharya. Nevertheless, that doesn't make what Krishnamacharya himself was teaching as somehow inferior. So this is a video I can make separately at some point to address what Iyengar has said about Vinyasa Krama and unpacking it, because he made these as public statements. So I feel it may be worthwhile to sort of make a rebuttal video in unpacking what Iyengar is trying to say and showing what is Vinyasa Krama really, and is it really as Iyengar makes it out to be in terms of being something more superficial at that. Anyways, what does he go on to say? Even in this penetration of approach, Vinyasa Krama is there, but it is applied in different mental and intellectual ways and attitudes. Okay, but I mean, who says that Vinyasa Krama in its initial stage didn't have all of the stuff that he's describing? He's assuming something is done quickly, and we could see his examples of jumpings, they tend to be rather quick. And I would say they are quicker than the Pattabhi Joy's primary series, even that video that we saw. It's quicker. So I don't know. We'll have to unpack it in another video, future video. But it's something that I wanted to mention. Also, he does then go on to explain Surya Namaskar and jumpings as such. So he's saying it's possible to have deeper intellectual penetration in Vinyasa Krama here. By this approach, the mind and intelligence, along with energy, or prana, and conscious awareness, prajna, are built up within the system in different aspects of human beings, sequentially and gradually. I mean, that's what Vinyasa Krama implies anyways. Similarly, Vinyasa Krama is not necessarily fast movements with the Surya Namaskar jumpings. So, yeah, that's the thing. Like, why is this assumption Vinyasa Krama is fast? So he's saying, no, it's not necessarily fast movements. It could be with slow movements too. I mean, that's what I've been saying. The Vinyasa Krama system of Krishnamacharya is a slow moving process with long breathing. If you look at Yoga Makaranda, he says slowly exhale and slowly move into the posture little by little. Like he's not indicating to go fast at all. It's not the case in Indra Devi's teaching either. And evidently in Ashtanga Vinyasa, Pattabhi Jois isn't teaching that like super fast. It's not, maybe not as fast as what I'm talking about with Vinyasa Krama as Srivatsa Ramaswamy is emphasizing. But it's certainly, Pattabhi Jois's presentation is certainly not fast, mindless movements neither. It doesn't have to be superficial on that level if one is moving mindfully, you know what I mean? Like what Alamelu was talking about, staying with the movement on the exhale, being fully with the movement, with the breathing. It's not mindless movement. It's slow and it's long breathing and it's mindful. In any case, that's Vinyasa Krama, traditional Vinyasa Krama, according to even children of Krishnamacharya, you know, ones that would have been with Krishnamacharya probably the most. So he's saying could be in slow movements, for instance, in order to do the Shirshasana or other postures he mentions. The opposite to Vinyasa is called Vishamanyasa. So Vishamanyasa means placing in an odd or irregular manner. Certainly it is not done in a disorderly way. Rather, it is a method of challenge. Anyways, so there's a lot there to unpack, but we'll stop there with the presentation covering Iyengar Yoga. And next time we'll look at Deshikachar representations of Surya Namaskar and also Paschimottanasana, Purvottanasana while we're at it. It's an important posture. And then finally, Srivatsa Ramaswamy, even the youngest daughter of Krishnamacharya, Sri Shubha Mohan Kumar, a representation of hers performing the Paschimottanasana, again, the important Paschimottanasana, and concluding the discussion with covering such topics. So I thank you again, and I'll chant again the Kshama Shloka, the chant asking for forgiveness for the Vedic mantra chanting. Yadakshatapada brashtam matrahinam tu yadbhavet tatsarvam kshamyatam deva narayana namostite visargabindu matrani padapatakshirani cha nyunani chetiraktani kshamsva purushotama kshamsva purushotama kshamsva purushotama. Thanks again for joining. Hope you appreciate it, and we'll take it up in the following video for concluding aspects of this presentation. Thank you very much.